They laughed at Marcus every day for being the poorest kid in school until one afternoon a black luxury car pulled up outside the gates. A powerful millionaire stepped out, walked straight past the shocked students, and placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder. Then he said something that made the entire school fall silent. "Your father once saved my life, and today I'm here to repay that debt." Welcome back to my channel. Before we continue with this powerful story, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who loves inspiring stories. And don't forget to comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Your support helps this channel grow and allows me to keep bringing you emotional stories like this one. Now, let's continue the story of the boy everyone mocked and bullied, until an act of kindness many years ago changed his life. The hallway erupted in laughter. Lockers slammed, shoes squeaked across the tile floor, and the usual chaos of Jefferson High buzzed through the air. But in the middle of it all stood Marcus Rivera, frozen beside his locker as a group of students circled him. One boy snatched the backpack from Marcus's shoulder and dumped its contents onto the floor. A few worn notebooks, a cracked calculator, and a brown paper bag holding the lunch Marcus had packed that morning. The boy picked up the bag, opened it, and burst out laughing. "Peanut butter again?" he sneered. "Man, your mom must really be struggling." The others laughed louder. Marcus didn't say anything. He had learned long ago that silence was easier. Another girl folded her arms and looked him up and down. "You know," she said, loudly so everyone could hear, "if you just joined the guys on the corner selling stuff, you wouldn't have to dress like a homeless person." More laughter. Marcus slowly bent down and began picking up his things. The hallway smelled faintly of cheap perfume and cafeteria pizza. Someone recorded the moment on their phone. Marcus knew the routine. It happened almost every week. And every week he chose the same response. Nothing. He zipped his backpack closed and walked past them. But just as he reached the exit doors, a loud voice shouted behind him, "Hey, Rivera!" Marcus stopped. "Why don't you bring that sick mom of yours to school next time? Maybe we can start a fundraiser." The laughter echoed again. Marcus clenched his fists. For a brief moment, anger flickered across his face, but he swallowed it and kept walking. Outside, the cold wind of the afternoon whipped through the parking lot. Marcus pulled his worn jacket tighter and began the 2-mile walk home, because the truth was, he didn't have time to fight bullies. He had bigger problems waiting for him. The apartment building where Marcus lived looked like it had been forgotten by the city years ago. Paint peeled from the walls, the stair railings rattled, and the hallway lights flickered like they might go out at any moment. Marcus pushed open the door to apartment 3B. "Mom?" he called softly. From the couch, a weak voice answered, "I'm here." Marcus. His mother, Elena Rivera, sat wrapped in a blanket, her face pale but her smile warm when she saw him. Marcus walked over and placed a grocery bag on the table. "Got you the medicine the pharmacy recommended," he said. Elena frowned slightly. "You spent money again?" Marcus shrugged. "I made some extra this morning fixing Mr. Taylor's phone." Elena looked at him carefully. She knew that tone. Marcus was hiding something. "You're working too hard," she whispered. Marcus smiled. "I'm fine." But the truth was, Marcus had been working before school, after school, and sometimes late into the evening. Washing cars. Fixing phones. Carrying groceries. Doing anything honest that paid a few dollars. Because Elena's health had been getting worse. And Marcus refused to let her worry about money. Elena watched him quietly for a moment. "You look just like your father when you smile," she said softly. Marcus paused. He had heard stories about his father all his life, Daniel Rivera, a hard-working man who had died in a construction accident months before Marcus was born. Man Marcus had never met, but whose reputation still lived in Elena's stories. He believed in helping people, Elena continued. Even when we had nothing, Marcus nodded. I know. And he meant it, because that was exactly how Marcus lived his own life, even if the world laughed at him for it. That evening, Marcus walked down the street, pushing a small cart filled with tools. The corner store owner waved when he saw him. Marcus, got another phone that needs fixing. Marcus smiled. Be right there. In the neighborhood where Marcus lived, most teenagers his age had already chosen a different path. Some stood on street corners making quick money, others hung around the liquor store late into the night, but Marcus avoided them. All not because he thought he was better than them, but because he had made a promise to himself he would never become the kind of man his mother would be ashamed of, even if it meant being poor, even if it meant being alone. Marcus fixed the phone quickly, earned $10, and continued walking home. And as he turned the corner toward his apartment building, he had no idea that within days, Marcus Rivera woke before sunrise every day, not because he wanted to, but because survival demanded it. At 5:30 in the morning, while most of Jefferson High was still asleep, Marcus was already outside the neighborhood grocery store. A delivery truck had just arrived. The driver opened the back door and nodded toward the heavy crates. You ready, kid? Marcus rolled up his sleeves. Always. For the next 40 minutes, he carried crates of produce into the store. Apples, potatoes, boxes of canned goods. By the time the job was done, Marcus's arms ached, but when the driver handed him $20, Marcus smiled. That $20 meant dinner tonight. School was harder, not because of the classes Marcus was actually good at. School. Math came naturally to him. Electronics fascinated him, and he had a quiet talent for solving problems others struggled with. But none of that mattered to the students at Jefferson High. Because in their eyes, Marcus Rivera was just a poor kid from the bad neighborhood. His shoes were old. His backpack was worn. And while other students talked about vacations and parties, Marcus talked about fixing phones and mowing lawns. So the teasing never stopped. Sometimes it was jokes. Sometimes it was cruel whispers. Sometimes it was worse. But Marcus endured it all, because every day after school, someone was waiting for him at home. That afternoon, Marcus returned to the apartment to find Elena asleep on the couch again. Her breathing sounded shallow. Marcus gently placed a blanket over her shoulders. Then he sat down at the small kitchen table and opened his homework. Numbers filled the page. Equations. Formulas. Marcus worked through them quickly, solving each one with quiet focus. For a moment, the world outside disappeared. No bullies. No money problems. Just logic and solutions. And deep down, Marcus wondered something he rarely allowed himself to think about. What if one day life could be different? What if one day he didn't have to struggle just to survive? Marcus closed his notebook and looked toward his sleeping mother. He didn't know it yet, but somewhere across the city, a wealthy businessman named Victor Bennett was about to walk back into a past he thought he had left behind, and that past had a name. Daniel Rivera, Marcus's father. And when Victor Bennett discovered who Marcus was, the life of the boy everyone looked down on would never be the same again. 3 days later, Marcus Rivera was sitting alone in the school library. The library was one of the few places in Jefferson High where people usually left him alone. Most students came only when they had to. Marcus came because he liked the quiet. Stacks of old textbooks surrounded him as he worked through a complex set of math problems in a worn notebook. His pencil moved quickly across the page, solving equations with the kind of focus that made the outside world disappear. He barely noticed someone approach his table. "Excuse me, are you Marcus?" Marcus looked up. Standing in front of him was a girl he had never seen before. She looked completely out of place in Jefferson. Her clothes were simple, but clearly expensive. Her posture was confident, and her eyes were sharp with curiosity. Marcus blinked in confusion. "Yeah, that's me." The girl smiled slightly. "I'm Olivia Bennett." Marcus had never heard the name before, but the moment she said it, two students at a nearby table whispered to each other. "That's the rich girl from Westbridge Academy," one of them murmured. Marcus frowned slightly. Westbridge Academy was one of the most private schools in the city. "What are you doing here?" Marcus asked. Olivia pulled out a chair and sat across from him like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Our school is partnering with Jefferson for a volunteer program this week," she explained. Marcus nodded slowly. He still didn't understand why she was talking to him. Olivia pointed at his notebook. "Is that calculus?" Marcus glanced down. "Yeah." She leaned closer to look at the equations. For a moment, her confident expression disappeared. "Wait, you solved this already?" Marcus shrugged. "It wasn't that hard." Olivia stared at the page. Most students in her advanced classes struggled with problems like that. "You solved it 3 steps shorter than the answer key," she said quietly. Marcus felt uncomfortable under her gaze. "It's just math." Olivia sat back in her chair. A small smile spread across her face. "Well, just math is currently destroying my grade in the national academic competition." Marcus blinked. "The what?" Olivia laughed softly. "Exactly." She closed Marcus's notebook and looked directly at him. "Would you help me?" Marcus froze. Help her? No one had ever asked him that before. Usually people only asked him to fix something broken. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully. Olivia shrugged casually. "Tutoring. Explaining how your brain does whatever it does." Marcus hesitated. He had homework. He had work after school, and he had his mother to take care of. But something about Olivia's curiosity made it hard to say. "No, I don't know," he said slowly. Olivia leaned forward. "I'll pay you." Marcus shook his head immediately. "No, I don't want money for that." Olivia looked surprised. "You're refusing money?" Marcus shrugged. "It's just explaining math." Olivia studied him for a moment. Most people she met were eager to take advantage of her wealth. Marcus didn't seem interested at all. And somehow that made her even more curious about him. "Fine," she said finally. "Then come over tomorrow after school and help me study." Marcus frowned. "Come where?" Olivia said it casually. "My house." Marcus nearly laughed. There was no way someone like her lived anywhere near his neighborhood. "Where do you live?" he asked. Olivia answered simply. "North Hill." Marcus's eyes widened. North Hill was where the richest families in the city lived. Massive homes, private security, gated driveways. People like Marcus never went there. "You're serious?" he asked. Olivia smiled. "Completely." Marcus hesitated again. He had never even stepped foot in that part of the city. And suddenly he imagined the looks people would give him if he showed up there in his worn shoes and old jacket. Olivia noticed his hesitation. "Look," she said gently. "You don't have to come if you don't want to." Marcus thought for a moment. Then he remembered the look on his mother's face that morning when she tried to hide. How weak she felt. Maybe helping Olivia for an hour wouldn't hurt. All right, he said finally. Olivia's smile returned. Instantly. Great. She grabbed a piece of paper and wrote something down. This is the address. Marcus took the paper. The numbers alone told him the house would probably be bigger than his entire apartment building. Tomorrow at 5? She asked. Marcus nodded slowly. 5. Olivia stood up and slung her bag over her shoulder. Then she paused. You know, she said thoughtfully, I think my dad would find you interesting. Marcus chuckled awkwardly. I doubt that. Olivia grinned. You'd be surprised. Marcus watched her walk away through the library doors, and as he looked down at the address in his hand, a strange feeling settled in his chest. He had no idea that stepping into that house tomorrow would be the moment his entire life began to change, because inside that house lived a man who owed a debt to Marcus's father, a debt that had been waiting 18 years to be repaid. The next afternoon, Marcus stood at the bus stop staring at the address Olivia had given him, North Hill. He had heard about the place his entire life, but he had never actually seen it up close. People like Marcus didn't belong there. The bus ride itself felt like traveling between two completely different worlds. As the city blocks changed, the cracked sidewalks and crowded buildings slowly disappeared. In their place came clean streets, tall trees, and houses so large they looked more like hotels. When Marcus stepped off the bus, he felt suddenly aware of his clothes. His jacket was worn at the sleeves. His shoes had small cracks in the sides, and yet the address on the paper led him straight toward one of the largest houses on the street. The Bennett residence, a tall iron gate, stood in front of a wide driveway lined with perfectly trimmed hedges. Beyond it stood a massive white house with glass windows that reflected the afternoon sun. Marcus hesitated. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe Olivia had forgotten what someone like him looked like. But before he could turn back, the gate slowly opened. Olivia stood on the other side, waving. You made it. Marcus walked in slowly, still looking around in disbelief. This place is huge, he muttered. Olivia laughed. My dad says it's modest. Marcus almost tripped over the word. Inside, the house was even more overwhelming. High ceilings, polished marble floors, paintings on the walls that looked like they belonged in museums. Marcus tried not to stare, but it was impossible. Olivia led him into a quiet study filled with bookshelves. This is where we'll work, she said, dropping her bag onto the desk. Marcus nodded and pulled out his notebook. For the next hour, the two of them worked through math problems together. Olivia quickly realized something surprising. Marcus didn't just understand the material. He saw patterns in it. He explained concepts in ways her teachers never had. At one point, Olivia leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. You should be at Westbridge Academy, she said. Marcus chuckled. That school probably costs more than my apartment. Olivia opened her mouth to respond, but suddenly, the door behind them opened. A tall man stepped into the room. His presence alone changed the atmosphere. Instantly, he was sharply dressed in a dark suit, his posture confident, his expression serious. Marcus didn't need an introduction. This had to be Victor Bennett. Olivia turned around. Oh, hey, Dad. Victor Bennett's eyes moved slowly from Olivia to Marcus. He didn't smile. Who is this? He asked calmly. Olivia stood up. This is Marcus. I told you about him. Victor's expression remained neutral. The boy from Jefferson High. Marcus stood awkwardly. Yes, sir. Victor stepped closer, studying him carefully. Something about Marcus's appearance seemed to confirm whatever concerns Victor already had. You brought him here to tutor you? Victor asked. Olivia crossed her arms slightly. Yes. Victor's voice became firmer. Olivia, we've talked about this. Marcus felt the tension immediately. I can leave, Marcus said quietly. But Olivia shook her head. No. Victor turned his attention back to Marcus. What exactly do you do? Marcus? Marcus answered honestly. I help people fix electronics. Phones, computers, things like that. Victor nodded slowly. And school? I do all right. Victor studied him for another moment. Then he asked a question that seemed simple. What's your last name? Marcus hesitated only briefly. Rivera. Victor froze. The change in his expression was subtle but undeniable. Rivera. For a moment. The room became completely silent. Victor Bennett looked at Marcus again. But this time something in his eyes had shifted. Rivera, he repeated slowly. Marcus nodded. Double quote. Yes. Sir. Victor's voice grew quieter. What's your father's name? Marcus answered without hesitation. Daniel Rivera. The moment those words left Marcus's mouth, Victor Bennett's world stopped. Images flashed through his mind. A small office, a struggling business, a man sitting across from him at a worn wooden desk, offering advice when no one else believed in him. Daniel Rivera, the man who had once given him a chance, the man whose guidance had led to the investment that made Victor his first $1 million. Victor hadn't seen him in almost 2 decades. He had heard only one thing afterward, that Daniel Rivera had died. Victor slowly looked back at Marcus. The resemblance was unmistakable now. The same eyes, the same quiet determination. Victor's voice softened. Daniel Rivera was your father? Marcus nodded. Double quotes. Yes. Victor sat down slowly in the chair beside the desk. For the first time since entering the room, the powerful millionaire looked stunned. Olivia frowned. Dad? Victor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked directly at Marcus. You said your father passed away. Marcus nodded again. Before I was born. Victor leaned back, processing the information. 18 years. 18 years since he had last seen the man who changed his life. And now, his son was standing in front of him. Victor exhaled slowly. Then he said something neither Marcus nor Olivia expected. I owe your father more than you can imagine. The room stayed silent after Victor Bennett spoke. I owe your father more than you can imagine. Marcus shifted awkwardly in his chair. He had heard people say kind things about his father before. Neighbors, old co-workers, even the manager of the grocery store where his mother once worked. But hearing it from someone like Victor Bennett, a man whose house alone looked like it could hold 10 families, felt different. Olivia looked from Marcus to her father, confused. Dad, what do you mean? Victor leaned forward slightly, resting his hands together. For a moment, he didn't look like a powerful businessman. He looked like a man remembering something important. 18 years ago, Victor began slowly. I was about to lose everything. Marcus listened quietly. I had a small investment idea, Victor continued. But no one believed in it. Banks turned me away. Investors laughed at me. I was drowning in debt. He paused, glancing at Marcus. And then I met your father. Marcus felt his chest tighten slightly. My father? He asked softly. Victor nodded. Daniel Rivera. Victor stood up and walked toward the large window overlooking the backyard. He didn't have much money, Victor said. But he had something more valuable. Marcus waited. Faith. Victor turned back toward them. Your father was working on a construction site where I was supervising a renovation project. We started talking during lunch breaks. Victor smiled faintly. He asked me questions about my business idea. Real questions. The guy most people didn't care enough to ask. Olivia listened carefully. Marcus sat completely still. And one day, Victor continued, "Your father told me something I've never forgotten." Victor looked directly at Marcus. He said, "If you believe in something honest, don't quit just because other people are afraid." Marcus felt a strange warmth in his chest hearing those words. Victor nodded slowly. That advice gave me the courage to take a risk I had been too afraid to take. Victor gestured around the massive house, and that risk became my first $1 million. The room grew quiet. Again, Marcus struggled to process the information. "My mom never told me that," he said quietly. Victor's voice softened. "She probably didn't know." Olivia folded her arms. "So, Marcus's dad basically helped start your company?" Victor nodded. "In a way." "Yes." Marcus looked down at his hands. His father, a man he had never met, had somehow helped create the empire standing around him. Victor walked back toward the desk. "Where do you live, Marcus?" Marcus hesitated before answering. "Southridge Apartments." Victor recognized the name immediately. One of the roughest parts of the city. "And your mother?" Victor asked gently. "She's not working right now." Victor noticed the careful way Marcus chose his words. "Is she ill?" Marcus nodded slowly. "She's been sick for a while." Olivia glanced toward her father. Victor remained quiet for a moment. Inside his mind, something had already begun to change. The man who helped him build his future had left behind a son struggling to survive. Victor Bennett was not the kind of man who ignored a debt like that. Finally, he spoke. "How old are you, Marcus?" 16. Victor nodded. Then he made a decision. "Marcus," he said calmly, "I would like to meet your mother." Marcus looked up in surprise. "My mom?" Victor smiled slightly. "Yes." Marcus hesitated. He couldn't imagine bringing someone like Victor Bennett into their tiny apartment. But Victor's voice was sincere. "I think," Victor continued, "it's time I properly thanked your father." Olivia smiled quietly, sensing the shift in the room. For the first time since Marcus arrived at the mansion, her father no longer saw him as a stranger. Victor extended his hand. Marcus looked at it for a moment. Then he shook it. Neither of them knew it yet, but that handshake was the beginning of something much bigger. Not just a debt being repaid, but a chain of events that would change both families forever. Marcus barely slept that night. Not because he had homework, not because of the bullies at school, but because of the words Victor Bennett had said before he left the study. "I would like to meet your mother." Marcus kept replaying the moment in his mind. It didn't feel real. Why would someone like Victor Bennett want to visit their tiny apartment? The thought alone made Marcus uneasy. The next afternoon, after school, Marcus walked home slowly. His neighborhood looked the same as it always had. Broken sidewalks, graffiti on the walls, a group of teenagers standing on the corner, exchanging quiet conversations. Marcus knew better than to get involved in. But somehow, Marcus felt different walking through it that day. As he reached the apartment building, he stopped outside for a moment. Inside that small apartment was the only world he had ever known. And now a man who lived in a mansion on North Hill wanted to step into it. Marcus pushed open the door. "Mom?" Elena Rivera sat at the kitchen table, sorting through a few medical bills. She looked up and smiled softly when she saw him. "You're home early today." Marcus placed his backpack down. "I met someone yesterday." Elena raised an eyebrow. "That sounds mysterious." Marcus hesitated. "I met a girl named Olivia Bennett." Elena thought for a moment. "The Bennett name sounds familiar." Marcus nodded slowly. "Her father is Victor Bennett." The moment Marcus said the name, Elena froze. Her eyes widened slightly. "Victor Bennett?" she repeated. Marcus noticed the change immediately. You know him? Elena leaned back in her chair. I haven't seen him in years, she said quietly. Marcus blinked. You've met him before? Elena nodded slowly. Your father knew him. Marcus felt his heart skip. He told me that yesterday. Elena sighed softly, as if memories were suddenly returning. Your father respected him, she said. Victor was just starting out back then. He had big dreams, but no one believed in him. Marcus leaned against the counter. Victor said Dad helped him. Elena smiled faintly. That sounds like your father. Marcus looked down for a moment. Then he said the part he had been nervous about. He wants to come here. Elena blinked. Here? Marcus nodded. He said he wants to thank Dad. Elena glanced around their small apartment. The chipped table, the old couch, the peeling paint near the window. She laughed softly. Well, he's going to see how life really turned out for us. Marcus stepped closer. Mom, we don't have to. A knock interrupted him. Both of them froze. Marcus frowned. Were you expecting someone? Elena shook her head. Marcus walked slowly toward the door. When he opened it, a black luxury car was parked outside the building, and standing in the hallway was Victor Bennett. For a moment, Marcus almost forgot to speak. Victor looked slightly out of place in the narrow hallway of the worn apartment building, but his expression was calm. Good evening, Marcus. Marcus stepped aside. Come in. Victor walked inside the apartment. The moment Elena stood up from the table and saw him, both of them stopped. For several seconds, neither spoke. Victor looked at her with recognition. Elena? Elena's eyes softened with surprise. Victor, it's really you. Victor nodded gently. It's been a long time. Elena smiled faintly. Yes, it has. Marcus watched the two of them carefully. The way they looked at each other didn't feel like strangers meeting for the first time. It felt like two people who shared a memory neither of them had expected to revisit. Victor glanced around the apartment, not with judgment, but with quiet understanding. Then he turned back to Elena. I came because of Daniel, he said softly. Elena's expression changed immediately. Victor continued. Your husband helped me at the lowest point of my life. Elena nodded slowly. That sounds like him. Victor looked at Marcus. And now I see his son carrying the same strength. The room fell silent again. But this time, the silence felt different. It felt like the beginning of something new. Neither Marcus nor Elena realized it yet. But the moment Victor Bennett stepped into that small apartment, two lives that had been separated for 18 years had just started moving toward each other again. And this time, neither of them would walk away unchanged. Victor Bennett did not forget promises, especially the ones he felt in his heart. 2 days after visiting Marcus's apartment, Victor sat in his office overlooking the city skyline. The tall glass windows reflected the late afternoon sun. But Victor's thoughts were far away from business reports and investment calls. Instead, he kept thinking about the small apartment in Southridge, the quiet strength in Marcus, and the tired but determined eyes of Elena Rivera. Victor picked up his phone. Angela, he said to his assistant, I need you to schedule a full medical evaluation for someone. Meanwhile, Marcus was finishing another long afternoon of work. He was crouched beside a parked car outside the corner grocery store, tightening the last bolt on a small engine repair. The owner handed him $15. Thanks, Marcus. You always fix things right. Marcus smiled. No problem. But as he stood up and wiped grease from his hands, he noticed something unusual. A sleek black car was parked across the street. The same car that had been outside his apartment earlier that week. The window rolled down. Victor Bennett stepped out. Marcus blinked in. Surprise, Mr. Bennett? Victor smiled slightly. Busy as always, I see. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. Awkwardly. Just finishing a job. Victor glanced at the repair tools. You shouldn't have to work this hard at 16. Marcus shrugged. It's what I have to do. Victor studied him for a Cinder moment. Then he handed Marcus a small envelope. What's this? Marcus asked. Information for your mother, Victor said calmly. A doctor I trust will run a full health evaluation tomorrow morning. Marcus stared at the envelope. That must cost. Don't worry about the cost. Marcus shook his head. I can't let you do that. Victor's voice softened. Marcus, this isn't charity. Marcus looked up. Victor continued. This is me honoring a man who once helped me when I needed it most. Marcus didn't know what to say. For the first time in years, hope flickered inside him. The next morning, Elena sat nervously in the waiting room of one of the city's best medical clinics. Everything around her felt too expensive. Too polished. Too far from the world she knew. Marcus sat beside her, holding the envelope Victor had given him. Mom, he whispered. It's going to be okay. Elena smiled faintly. You sound just like your father. Across the room, Victor Bennett walked in. Elena looked up, surprised. You came? Victor nodded. Of course. Elena shook her head gently. You didn't have to. Victor smiled. Yes, I did. For the first time since Daniel Rivera's death. Elena felt something unfamiliar. Relief. Over the next few weeks, things slowly began to change. Marcus still worked his odd jobs. He still walked to school every day. But Victor quietly began removing the obstacles that had weighed down their lives. The doctors discovered that Elena's illness was treatable with the right medication and care. Victor arranged everything. Appointments. Treatment plans. Transportation. But he never made it feel like charity. Whenever Elena thanked him, he would simply say, I'm repaying an old debt. Meanwhile, Marcus continued tutoring Olivia. Their study sessions became easier, more natural. Sometimes they laughed about small things. Sometimes they argued about math problems, but something important grew between them. Respect. And genuine friendship. One evening after a study session, Olivia watched Marcus pack his notebook. You know something? She said. What? You're the smartest person I know. Marcus laughed. That's definitely not true. Olivia shrugged. It's true to me. Marcus smiled awkwardly. Then Olivia said something unexpected. My dad talks about you a lot. Marcus raised an eyebrow. In a good way? Olivia nodded. He says you remind him of someone important. Marcus didn't need to ask who. Across town that same night, Victor Bennett sat in his quiet living room. Across from him sat Elena Rivera. They had been talking for nearly an hour. About Marcus. About Daniel. About the years that had passed since Victor last saw them. At one point, Elena laughed softly. You know something strange? Victor looked up. What? You're the first person in a long time who makes life feel hopeful again. Victor didn't answer immediately, because the truth was, he felt the same way for years after losing his wife. Victor had buried himself in work, business, meetings. Investments. Endless responsibilities. But sitting there with Elena felt different. It felt peaceful. Victor finally smiled. Maybe life isn't finished surprising us yet. Elena smiled back. Neither of them realized it yet, but something new had quietly begun between them. Something neither expected. Something that would eventually change their lives and Marcus's future in ways none of them could yet imagine. Marcus had learned something important over the years. Bullies didn't stop. They just waited. For a few weeks, things at school had been unusually quiet. Marcus spent most of his time either in class or in the library, studying and occasionally helping Olivia with practice problems for her competition. But peace never lasted long at Jefferson High. One Friday afternoon, Marcus stepped out into the school courtyard as the final bell rang. Students poured out of the building, laughing and talking about weekend plans. Marcus adjusted his backpack and started toward the gate. That was when he heard a familiar voice. "Well, look who's still pretending to be a genius." Marcus stopped. 3 boys stood near the basketball court. The same group that had tormented him for months. The tallest one, Brandon, walked closer with a mocking grin. "I heard you've been hanging out with the rich girl lately," Brandon said loudly. A few nearby students turned to watch. Marcus sighed quietly. "I'm just helping her study." Brandon laughed. "Oh yeah? And she just magically picked you?" More students gathered around. Marcus knew how this worked. The crowd, the jokes, the humiliation. Another boy shoved Marcus lightly in the shoulder. "You think you're better than us now?" Marcus stayed calm. "I never said that." But Brandon stepped closer, his voice rising so everyone could hear. "You're still the same broke kid from Southridge." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Marcus clenched his fists. Before he could respond, a deep rumble echoed from the street outside the school. Gates. Heads turned. A sleek black luxury car rolled slowly to a stop. Students whispered, "That car costs more than my house. Who is that?" The driver's door opened. Out stepped Victor Bennett, dressed in a tailored dark suit. He walked with quiet authority across the pavement toward the courtyard. The entire crowd parted instinctively. Even the teachers near the entrance stepped aside. Victor's eyes scanned the students until they landed on Marcus. He walked directly toward him. The bully stepped back slightly, unsure of what was happening. Victor stopped beside Marcus and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Marcus," he said calmly. Marcus looked stunned. Double quotes, "Mr. Bennett, what are you doing here?" Victor glanced around at the watching students. Then he spoke loudly, enough for everyone to hear. "I came to see the son of a man who once changed my life." The courtyard fell silent. Brandon frowned. What's he talking about? Victor turned toward him. His voice remained calm but powerful. "Daniel Rivera," Victor said, "was one of the most honorable men I've ever met." Marcus felt his chest tighten. Victor continued, "Many years ago, when I had nothing, your father believed in me when no one else did." Students stared in shock. Victor gestured around. "The company I built, the success I have today." He paused. "Started because your father encouraged me to take a chance." The silence deepened. Then Victor said something that would spread through Jefferson High for years. "And today," he said firmly, "I stand here because I refuse to forget the people who helped me when I was nothing." Marcus could hardly breathe. Victor looked down at him and smiled. "You may not realize it yet, Marcus, but your father was a great man." Behind them, the bullies stood speechless. For the first time in their lives, they looked uncertain. Victor turned slightly toward them. His voice sharpened just enough. "And anyone who mocks his son clearly doesn't understand the value of character." Brandon lowered his eyes. The crowd remained completely silent. Marcus looked around at the same students who had laughed at him for months. Now their expressions had changed. Shock, confusion, respect. Victor squeezed Marcus's shoulder gently. "Walk with me," he said. Marcus nodded. Slowly, together, they walked toward the black car waiting outside the gate. As they drove away, the whispers began spreading through the crowd. "Marcus Rivera knows Victor Bennett. That's the billionaire from North Hill. Did you hear what he said about Marcus's dad?" By the next morning, everyone in Jefferson High would know the name, Marcus Rivera. And for the first time in his life, no one would dare laugh at him again.
Life rarely changes overnight. But sometimes, it begins to change in small, quiet ways. For Marcus Rivera, those changes started appearing slowly after the day Victor Bennett visited his school. The whispers at Jefferson High never completely disappeared, but the tone had changed. Students who once laughed at Marcus now watched him with curiosity. Some even nodded when they passed him in the hallway. The bullies stayed away. Marcus didn't celebrate the change. He simply focused on what mattered most: school, work, and his mother. But at home, something far more important was happening. The medication from the clinic had begun to help Elena Rivera. For the first time in years, she felt her strength returning. The constant exhaustion that once kept her on the couch slowly faded. One afternoon Marcus walked into the apartment to find something he hadn't seen in a long time. His mother standing in the kitchen, cooking. Marcus froze in the doorway. "Mom." Elena turned and smiled. "Don't look so shocked," she said playfully. Marcus laughed in disbelief. "You're standing." "I've been standing all morning," she said proudly. Marcus felt relief wash over him. Seeing her stronger made every struggle he had endured feel worth it. But Marcus wasn't the only one noticing the change. Victor Bennett had been quietly checking in on Elena's progress. Sometimes it was a phone call. Sometimes it was a short visit. And every time he came by, Marcus noticed something interesting. His mother smiled more. One evening Victor stopped by with groceries. Marcus was finishing homework at the table when he heard the door open. "Victor?" Elena called from the kitchen. "Just me," Victor answered. Marcus looked up as Victor entered carrying several bags. "You didn't have to do that," Elena said. Victor placed the groceries on the counter. "I know," he replied. "But I wanted to." Marcus watched them carefully. Something about the way they spoke to each other felt different. Comfortable. Natural. Like two people who had known each other far longer than the few weeks since Victor had reappeared in their lives. Victor glanced at Marcus. "How's school?" Marcus shrugged. "Better." Victor smiled. "That's good." Elena poured tea and handed Victor a cup. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "Daniel used to say something similar to what you told Marcus the other day." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Oh." Elena nodded. "He used to say, the way people treat you says more about them than it does about you." Victor smiled softly. "That sounds like Daniel." The room fell into a peaceful silence. Marcus noticed the way Victor listened when his mother spoke. Not like a businessman rushing through a meeting, but like someone who genuinely cared about every word. A few days later, Elena received another surprise. Victor had arranged an interview for her at a small accounting firm owned by a friend. Nothing extravagant. Just a steady office job. Elena held the job offer letter in her hands, still struggling to believe it. "Victor, this is too much," she said quietly. Victor shook his head. "No." Elena looked at him. "This is just the world finally giving something back to the family that once helped me." Marcus watched the exchange silently. And for the first time in years, he saw something in his mother's eyes that had been missing for a long time. Hope. That evening, after Marcus went to his room to study, Victor stayed a little longer. He and Elena sat quietly at the kitchen table. The city lights flickered through the window. After a moment Elena spoke. "You've done more for us than anyone ever has." Victor shook his head slightly. "I'm only returning a kindness." Elena looked at him thoughtfully. "You've already repaid that debt." Victor didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at the photo sitting on the shelf. A younger Elena. A smiling Daniel Rivera. And a baby Marcus. Victor spoke softly. Daniel was the kind of man who believed in people when the world didn't. He turned back toward Elena. "And if he were here today, he would want to see you and Marcus happy." Elena felt her heart soften. For years after Daniel's death, she had built a wall around her life. No new relationships. No new risks. Just survival. But sitting across from Victor. For the first time in a very long time. That wall didn't feel quite as strong. And neither of them realized it yet. But the quiet friendship growing between them was slowly becoming something more. Something neither of them had expected to find again. Love. Jefferson High had always been a place where rumors traveled faster than the morning bell. But the story of Marcus Rivera and the Millionaire spread faster than anything the school had seen before. By Monday morning, everyone had heard some version of it. Some said Marcus was secretly rich. Others claimed Victor Bennett was sponsoring his education. A few insisted Marcus was related to the billionaire somehow. None of them knew the truth. Marcus didn't bother correcting anyone. He simply walked into school the same way he always had, quiet, focused, and carrying the same worn backpack. But something had changed. As he passed through the hallway, a few students nodded at him. Others stepped aside respectfully. The whispers were no longer mocking. They were curious. Even Brandon and his friends kept their distance. Marcus noticed it immediately, but he didn't react. Because deep down, Marcus understood something important. Respect gained through fear never lasted. Respect earned through character did. And that was the only kind he cared about. That afternoon Marcus met Olivia in the library again. She dropped her bag onto the table and leaned back in her chair. "You know you're famous now, right?" Marcus frowned. "I'm what?" Olivia laughed. "The whole school is talking about you." Marcus sighed. "I wish they wouldn't." Olivia studied him. "You really don't like attention, do you?" Marcus shrugged. "I'm used to being invisible." Olivia shook her head. "Well, that's not happening anymore." Marcus opened his notebook. "Good. Maybe now we can actually study." Olivia grinned. "You're impossible." But as they worked through practice problems, Olivia noticed something. Marcus seemed lighter. More relaxed. For the first time since they met, he wasn't constantly worried about someone interrupting or making fun of him. At one point Olivia closed her textbook and watched him think through a difficult equation. "You know something?" she said. Marcus looked up. "What?" "If you had grown up in a different neighborhood, you'd probably be at the top of the best school in the city." Marcus smiled slightly. "Maybe." Olivia leaned forward. My dad thinks the same thing. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Your dad thinks about me that much? Olivia laughed. You have no idea. Meanwhile, across the city, Victor Bennett was finishing a long business meeting. As the executives left the room, Victor remained seated for a moment, staring at the city skyline outside his office window. His mind wasn't on business. It was on the small apartment in South Ridge. On Marcus. And on Elena. Victor hadn't expected his life to change this way. For years after losing his wife, he had buried himself in work. He told himself he was too busy for anything else. But lately, something felt different. The quiet conversations with Elena. The way she laughed when he told stories about Marcus's father. The way she thanked him for things he felt she didn't need to thank him for. Victor leaned back in his chair. For the first time in a long time, the emptiness he had carried since his wife's passing didn't feel quite as heavy. That evening Marcus arrived home to find Elena smiling as she prepared dinner. How was school? She asked. Marcus sat down at the table. Strange. Elena raised an eyebrow. Strange how? Marcus shrugged. People are being nice. Elena laughed softly. That must be a new experience. Marcus smiled. Very new. Elena studied him for a moment. You deserve it, Marcus. Marcus nodded quietly. Then he asked something he had been thinking about. Mom, do you like Victor? Elena nearly dropped the spoon she was holding. Marcus. He raised his hands. I'm just asking. Elena tried to hide a small smile. He's a good man. Marcus leaned back in his chair. That's not what I asked. Elena shook her head, laughing. You sound just like your father. Marcus grinned. Is that a yes? Elena sighed. I think life sometimes gives people second chances. Marcus nodded slowly. And for the first time, he realized something. Victor Bennett hadn't just changed Marcus's life. He had brought something back into his mother's life too. Something she had lost for many years. Happiness. And neither Marcus nor Elena knew it yet. But that happiness was about to grow into something much bigger than either of them expected. Spring arrived quietly in the city. The cold winds faded, trees began to bloom along the sidewalks, and the world seemed to soften after months of gray skies. For Marcus Rivera, life had become something he once thought impossible. Stable. His mother's health had improved steadily with treatment. The new job Victor had helped her secure at the small accounting firm was going well, and for the first time in years, Elena Rivera left the apartment each morning with energy instead of exhaustion. Marcus still worked his small jobs after school, but now it was by choice rather than necessity. More importantly, he no longer carried the same weight on his shoulders. But the biggest change was something Marcus noticed in his mother. She laughed more. And almost every time she laughed, Victor Bennett was nearby. One evening, Marcus returned home to find the apartment unusually quiet. Mom, he called. No answer. Marcus walked into the kitchen and saw a note on the table. Dinner with Victor. Back soon. Marcus stared at the note for a moment before smiling. About time, he muttered. Across town, Victor and Elena sat at a quiet restaurant overlooking the river. The golden lights of the city reflected on the water as evening settled in. Elena stirred her tea slowly. "This place is beautiful," she said. Victor smiled. "I used to come here years ago." Elena looked up. "With your wife?" Victor nodded gently. "Yes." The air between them grew thoughtful but not uncomfortable. Elena understood that feeling well. "Daniel loved quiet places like this too," she said softly. Victor studied her for a moment. "You still miss him?" Elena smiled faintly. "Every day." Victor nodded. "So do I." Elena looked surprised. "You do?" Victor leaned back slightly. "Your husband changed my life. Without him, I wouldn't be sitting here today." Elena's eyes softened. "He believed in people," she said. Victor nodded. "And he was right to." For a moment, neither spoke. The river flowed quietly outside the window. Finally, Victor said something he had been thinking about for weeks. "Elena. I've spent years believing that after my wife passed away, my life would simply continue as it was." Elena listened carefully. "Work," Victor continued. "Meetings. Responsibilities. The same routine every day." He looked at her gently. "But lately, things feel different." Elena's heart began to beat a little faster. Victor continued quietly. "You've reminded me that life doesn't stop giving us chances to be happy." Elena looked down at her hands. "I wasn't looking for that," she admitted. Victor smiled softly. "Neither was I." For a long moment they simply looked at each other. Two people who had spent years carrying grief. Two people who had built walls around their hearts. But somehow, through Marcus and the memory of Daniel Rivera, their paths had crossed again. And now those walls no longer felt quite as strong. Elena finally spoke. "I was afraid to open my heart again," she said honestly. Victor nodded. "So was I." He paused. "But sometimes life sends us reminders that love doesn't disappear just because we've lost someone." Elena's eyes shimmered slightly. "And sometimes," Victor continued softly, "it returns when we least expect it." Elena smiled gently. For the first time in many years, the word future didn't feel frightening. It felt possible. Back at the apartment, Marcus sat at the kitchen table finishing his homework. He glanced at the clock. His mother still hadn't returned. Marcus smiled to himself. Something inside him already knew what was happening. The same man who had helped change Marcus's life was slowly becoming something much more important. Family. And very soon, Victor Bennett would make a decision that would surprise everyone, including Marcus and Olivia. A decision that would turn two separate families into one. Life has a strange way of bringing people together. Sometimes through joy. Sometimes through hardship. And sometimes through a kindness that echoes across years. For Victor Bennett, the memory of Daniel Rivera had never truly faded. But it wasn't until he met Elena again that he began to understand something deeper. Daniel's kindness had not only changed Victor's future. It had unknowingly brought Victor back into the life of the family he left behind. One warm Saturday afternoon, Victor invited Marcus and Elena to the large garden behind his home. The sky was bright, and the trees along the stone walkway swayed gently in the breeze. Marcus stood beside Olivia near the fountain. "You know what this is about?" Olivia whispered. Marcus shrugged. "Your dad said it was something important." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "That usually means something dramatic." Marcus laughed quietly. "You're the dramatic one." Across the garden, Victor walked toward Elena. He seemed unusually nervous. Elena noticed it immediately. "You look like you're about to give a speech," she teased gently. Victor smiled. "Maybe I am." Marcus and Olivia watched from a distance. "Your dad never looks nervous," Olivia whispered. Marcus nodded. "Mine would probably look the same if he were about to do something big." Victor stopped in front of Elena. For a moment he simply looked at her. Then he spoke. "Elena, the day I met Marcus, I believed I was simply repaying a debt to Daniel." Elena listened quietly. "But the truth is," Victor continued, "something unexpected happened." Elena tilted her head slightly. "What do you mean?" Victor smiled gently. "I found something I thought I had lost forever." Elena's heart began to race. Victor took a slow breath. "For years after my wife passed away, I believed love had left my life." He looked directly into Elena's eyes. "But you reminded me that the heart doesn't stop hoping." Marcus and Olivia had both gone completely silent now. Victor reached into his pocket. Elena's eyes widened. Victor knelt down on one knee. "Elena Rivera," he said softly, "would you give me the honor of building a new future together?" Marcus blinked. Olivia's jaw dropped. Victor opened a small ring box. "Will you marry me?" For a moment the entire garden seemed to hold its breath. Elena covered her mouth in surprise. Tears filled her eyes. Victor." She laughed softly through the emotion. "You've already changed my life once." Victor smiled. "And I hope to keep doing it." Elena nodded gently. "Yes." Marcus and Olivia looked at each other in shock. "Wait," Olivia whispered. Marcus started laughing. "Oh no." Olivia laughed too. "This means..." Marcus finished the sentence. "We're going to be step-siblings." They both burst out laughing. For weeks, people at school had whispered about Marcus and Olivia being secretly in love. And now the truth was even more surprising. They had never been a couple at all. They had simply been two friends whose families were about to become one. Victor stood and hugged Elena as Marcus and Olivia walked toward them. Marcus smiled at his mother. "You deserve this," he said. Olivia grinned at Marcus. "Well, looks like we're officially family now." Marcus laughed. "Guess I can't charge you tutoring fees anymore." Olivia rolled her eyes. "You never did anyway." Victor placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "For the first time in a long time," he said quietly, "this feels like the beginning of something wonderful." And for everyone standing in that garden, it truly was. But the story wasn't finished yet. Because one final chapter still remained. The moment when Marcus would look back on everything that had happened. And realize the greatest lesson his father had unknowingly left behind. That one act of kindness can change lives, even decades later. 6 months later. The sun shone brightly over the same garden where Victor Bennet had proposed. But this time, the space looked completely different. White chairs lined the stone walkway. Soft music floated through the air. Flowers decorated every corner of the garden. Friends, co-workers, and a few curious neighbors filled the seats. It was a wedding. At the front of the garden stood Victor Bennet, dressed in a dark suit, looking calmer than he had in years. Across from him stood Elena Rivera, glowing with a quiet happiness Marcus had never seen before. Marcus sat beside Olivia in the front row. Olivia leaned over and whispered, smiling. "Still weird calling him my stepdad?" Marcus chuckled. "A little." Olivia nudged him playfully. "You're stuck with us now." Marcus smiled. "I think I can survive." As the ceremony began, Marcus found himself thinking about the long road that had brought them here. The small apartment. The nights his mother was too sick to stand. The endless odd jobs. The laughter of bullies in the school hallway. It all felt like a different lifetime. The officiant spoke gently as Victor and Elena exchanged vows. But Marcus's eyes drifted to the sky for a moment. He thought about the man he had never met. Daniel Rivera. The father whose kindness had unknowingly shaped everything that had happened. Marcus whispered quietly to himself. "I hope you're seeing this." After the ceremony, guests gathered around the garden tables. Laughter filled the air. Marcus stood near the fountain when someone approached him. It was Brandon. Marcus recognized him immediately. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Brandon cleared his throat. "Hey. Marcus." Marcus waited. Brandon looked slightly embarrassed. "I just wanted to say. I was wrong about you." Marcus raised an eyebrow. Brandon shrugged awkwardly. "You proved everyone wrong." Marcus smiled calmly. "My dad used to say something about that." "What?" "That the way people treat you says more about them than it does about you." Brandon nodded slowly. "Your dad sounds like a good man." Marcus looked toward Victor and Elena, now laughing with guests. "He was," Marcus said quietly. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, Victor joined Marcus near the garden steps. "You're thinking about your father," Victor said. Marcus nodded. "I wish I had met him." Victor placed a hand on his shoulder. "I knew him," Victor said. Marcus looked up. Victor smiled warmly. "And I can tell you something with absolute certainty." Marcus waited. "You're exactly the kind of son he would have been proud of." Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. For years he had wondered if his father would have been proud of him. Now he finally had his answer. Victor looked out at the garden where Elena and Olivia were talking. "You know," Victor said thoughtfully, "sometimes the smallest acts of kindness end up changing lives in ways we never expect." Marcus nodded. "My dad believed that." Victor smiled. "And now so do I." Marcus looked around at the family that had somehow grown out of hardship, loss, and unexpected second chances. His mother was happy. Victor had found love again. Olivia had become the sister he never expected to have. And Marcus himself had learned something far more valuable than wealth or success. He had learned that a single act of kindness can travel across years, and come back when you need it most. Marcus smiled quietly. Because the boy who had once been mocked as the poorest kid in school had gained something far greater than money. He had gained a family. And a future. The end. Thank you for spending time with us on the Story Channel. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share so more people can discover it. And remember, sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change someone's entire life. See you in the next story.